Hello, this is Gregory Eaton. I asked parishioners at All Saints Church to let me know what hymns they might like to hear for a home hymn sing video, and this is the first of these videos I'm producing. I hope there will be more. Certainly, if you are interested in hymns that we don't cover today, let me know, and I will see what I can do to produce more of these videos. So what is a hymn? According to St. Augustine, a hymn had to have to fit three components. One is that a hymn is praise. The second is that it must be praise of God. And the third is that that praise of God needs to be sung. Hymns basically are the texts we sing, and we sing them. Our singing makes them hymns. So when I asked to get suggestions of what people wanted to hear, I didn't know what sort of things would be suggested, and I was very pleased to see one because it may be the most important hymn in any collection anywhere. And that is both because of its age and because it is the only hymn that is actually required by the service of Eucharist or Holy Communion in the Book of Common Prayer. Now, you might be curious about that. You may remember in a previous video that I did for All Saints Church, I said that up until the 1830s or 40s, before the Oxford movement and the Anglo-Catholics, hymns were prohibited in Anglican worship. All except for one, and that was whenever the service of Holy Communion happened, you could have what we call the Sanctus or Holy, Holy, Holy. That hymn is part of the service of communion and has been around for centuries. I was asked by one parishioner if we could sing together the Deutsche Messe version, found at S130 in the hymnal 1982. This is by Franz Schubert. If you don't know Schubert's music, he is maybe one of the most prolific composers of the classic era, and certainly, given his short life, composed more music in that brief amount of time than any other composer in a comparable period. He composed so much music that it is said anecdotally that there were occasions on which he heard music he liked and wondered who wrote it, not knowing that he himself had written it. So the Deutsche Messe is his setting in German of the Lutheran text for communion, and the Sanctus, the Heilig, 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 has been translated into English for our Holy, Holy, Holy Lord God of power and might. And if you have a hymnal, you can turn to S130 if you'd like to see the music. And if you don't have a hymnal, I will be putting the text on the screen. So one thing about any hymn is that you are always free to join in and sing. And I hope that you can make a joyful sound whenever the opportunity arises. But if you don't feel like singing, hymns are texts that are praise to God, and you can always use them for prayer and meditation as they are happening. So here is S130. And I hope you will sing along. The text will be on the screen, and we'll talk about the next hymn after that. Now that we've sung the one hymn that is required by the prayer book, we can begin to look at hymns that are optional, but that doesn't make them any less important. So a very, very popular hymn that was requested is number 376 in the hymnal 1982, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. Now, before I talk about the music, which is very important, I want to talk about the words. The words are by Henry Van Dyke, who's originally born in Germantown, Pennsylvania in 1852 and lived a very full and eventful life until 1933. He graduated from Princeton in 1873, became a Presbyterian minister, was a friend of Helen Keller, officiated at the funeral of Mark Twain, and in non-religious work was appointed by President Woodrow Wilson as minister to the Netherlands and Luxembourg in 1913. That he didn't hold that post past the beginning of the First World War and came back to the U.S., but his work as a Presbyterian minister was very rich and full, and he wrote quite a few hymn texts and poetic religious works. His most famous, of course, is Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. And it was written to go with the tune from the Ninth Symphony by Ludwig van Beethoven. Now, what you may not know about Beethoven is that at the age of 14, he was very famous for playing two particular instruments. One was the viola, and the other was the organ. In fact, his biographies talk about how he was very frustrated as a young boy that he was not allowed to take organ lessons until his feet could reach the pedals. And being of short stature all of his life, it took until he was 12, almost 13, before that was allowed. But by the age of 14, he was famed for his abilities in playing the organ. He never wrote any music for the organ. I don't know why, but apparently he loved the instrument. The Choral Symphony, the Ninth Symphony, was written towards the end of his life when he lost his hearing almost completely, if not entirely. And it has that very famous melody at the end to a poem by Schiller. But the tune got adapted by Edward Hodges. Now, Hodges was born in the United Kingdom and would finish his life there, but he's most famous for having been organist of Trinity Church, Wall Street in New York, and he was the organist at the opening of the current building in 1846. He designed the organ that was first put into the church and created a very famous music program, which he ran from 1846 until 1859, when he retired due to ill health. He then returned to Britain and died there a few years later. But he had adapted this very famous tune from the Ninth Symphony into the tune we know as Ode to Joy. Now, a lot of hymnals have taken this tune and sort of straightened it out from what Beethoven originally wrote. You may have heard that often in the third phrase you get ta 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 ta, and then it stops. And then the next phrase begins right on the first beat of the next measure. Tum pum 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 pum. So it's exactly like the first phrase, which is not what an interesting composer would do. That's what a boring composer would do, and it's not what Beethoven did. Beethoven, in order to give his tone urgency, started that last phrase a beat early. And so what it should do, and what it does do in the hymnal 1982, is ta 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 tum pum ta 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 tum pum 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 pum, which that anticipation of the final phrase really helps to give it a sense of moving forward. And I think that it's a distinctive element of the hymnal 1982 that we have that rhythm as Beethoven wrote it. Now, I know that some of my colleagues don't play it that way because they think that people can't sing it, that it's too hard. But I hope you'll find that the way I play the tune makes it not only easy to sing that rhythm, but absolutely logical. And here is number 376, Ode to Joy. Another hymn I was very pleased to have requested is number 490 in the hymnal 1982, I Want to Walk as a Child of the Light. And the reason I was pleased to have that requested is because the author of the text, who's also the composer of the tune, happens to live right here in Austin. Her name is Kathleen Thomerson. She is an accomplished organist and choral conductor. She was a favorite student of the composer and organist Jean Langlais in Paris in the mid-20th century, and has wonderful stories about her studies with the maître, Jean Langlais. This particular hymn was written after she had been to Church of the Redeemer in Houston, and Kathleen has a story she tells about driving in the car and thinking about her experience and just having this feeling of wanting to be with Jesus wash over her. And that's where the words began to come into focus for her. I want to walk as a child of the light. I want to be with Jesus. And she wrote the tune to go with the words that she came up with. And this is not as common as you might think. Texts and tunes are often by two completely different people. So it's wonderful to have words designed and then a tune purpose made all by the same person. So I will put the words for I Want to Walk as a Child of the Light on your screen, and I hope you will sing along. Here is number 490 in the hymnal 1982. Our next hymn is number 482 in the hymnal 1982. It was requested also, and the text, Lord of all hopefulness, Lord of all joy, is by Jan Struther, is the name given in the hymnal. Her actual name was Joyce Torrance Graham. She wrote under a pen name. She was born in 1901 in England. In World War II, she moved to New York City and was there until her death in 1953. She's most famous for having written the novel Mrs. Miniver, but her faith was very important to her, and she wrote several hymn texts, and this is one of them. The tune is an old Irish folk tune that was published in several collections and was first used in hymn form in a 1927 publication called the Church Hymnary, where it was used for the text, Be Thou My Vision. The form of the tune for Lord of All Hopefulness is a little bit different from the form used for Be Thou My Vision. It has a couple extra notes in it, but I think you'll pick that up right away. And the accompaniment I use for the last verse is by David Hurd, and it has a wonderful sort of offbeat sense at the end that then resolves. Well, I should say it comes to rest, but it's a little unresolved, and it sort of helps that feeling of longing, I think, that's in the text. This text takes us through the day from morning to evening. And I hope you will enjoy singing along with number 482 in the hymnal. Our final hymn today is number 473 in the hymnal 1982. This is Lift High the Cross, a favorite of a lot of people, and it talks about being a standard bearer for Christ in our lives throughout not just Sunday worship, but throughout the week. The text is by an Anglican clergyman, George William Kitchen, who lived from 1827 to 1912, educated at Christ College, and he was mostly headmaster at academic institutions until he became Dean of Winchester Cathedral in the south of England in 1883. He was there for 10 years until in 1894 he became Dean of a cathedral at the opposite end of the country in Durham. Frankly, two of my favorite cathedrals, so he was a lucky person to be in charge of both of those places. And he was at Durham from 1894 until his death in 1912. Lift High the Cross is probably his most famous hymn text, although it is not his only one. The tune is named Crucifer, and most of you will know that a crucifer is the person who carries the cross on the pole in processions in the church, and so of course that's a very good name for a tune about Lift High the Cross. It was written by Sir Sidney Nicholson, who was knighted for his contributions to church music. Nicholson lived from 1875 to 1947. He was organist of several cathedrals, most notably Westminster Abbey. But in church music circles, he is most famous, even above being organist of Westminster Abbey, for having founded what was called the School of English Church Music in 1927. That eventually became the Royal School of Church Music in 1945, and is still active today. They promote choral music, hymn singing, organ playing, and have quite the educational program. It is one of the most important musical institutions in the Anglican Communion. This is a great tune, a stirring tune, and I hope you will enjoy singing it. As with the other hymns, the text will be on your screen, and feel free to sing along. As I said, it's number 473 in the hymnal if you have a copy of the hymnal. So here is Lift High the Cross.